Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 46. I'm Steve Kwan.
And I'm Brother Matt Kwan.
BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent BJJ approach, and we're actually using the right microphone system this time.
Yeah, so last time when we said we were using it, we weren't.
Yeah, I added a little disclaimer at the beginning of the episode explaining that I kind of screwed up. But this time I can see right on my computer, it says, you are using the right audio system. So
I wish I could scold you, but I don't do any of the audio stuff, so I really can't say anything.
Yeah. Hey, I will say this as someone who has spent his life doing pretty complex problem solving. Audio is really, really hard. Like, it is shocking how hard it is to do this stuff. Anyone out there who's done audio engineering before can probably relate to what I'm saying, but it is shockingly hard how challenging it is to get decent audio to come out of a computer. I'm still not sure how to really make this work perfectly. Like a lot of the time, even with really good equipment, there's like hissing in the background and stuff, and I have to go in and strip it out afterwards. It's kind of a nightmare. So my hat's off to anyone out there who does this stuff for a living. I know now that it is not easy at all to do.
Yeah.
Cool.
How you doing, Steve?
I'm pretty good. I actually had a pretty weird and nasty eye injury last week. Matt knows about this, and I sent a message to our mailing list, but I tore my cornea doing something completely unrelated to Jiu-Jitsu. I just rubbed my eyes before bed. My eye was really itchy, and so I rubbed it, and man, there must have been something in it, because when I went and I looked at my eye afterwards before I went to bed, it was bleeding, and there were like visible pieces hanging loose. It was, gross.
But you told me that was from auto-filleting yourself.
Let's not talk about... Okay, I'll have to edit that out. Autofellatio generally... I mean, I know that some of that stuff can be freaky, but to my knowledge, it generally does not involve stabbing yourself in the eye. But
wow.
Yeah, again, I'm
you
not
are
an
a
expert.
Kwan.
Yeah, it's true. If you have experience with autofellatio, write in and let us know. But yeah, so there must have been something in my eye, because I wound up having to... I don't know, when I rubbed it, it like really cut it up bad. So I had to go into the hospital. The good news is that with cornea injuries, as long as it's just the cornea, it usually heals back up pretty fast, and it's already mostly back to normal. But I just returned to the mats after about a week off yesterday, so that was fun. Not as much ring rust as I thought I'd have, so that was good. But yeah,
isn't it funny how sometimes if you have to take time off, like I don't get a chance to take a lot of time off. I'm looking forward to the Christmas break. I'm probably gonna take like maybe a week or two off, but sometimes when you come back after long stints of consistently training and you take like a week or two off, you come back, you actually feel like better.
It is weird. And I think we've talked about that before, how sometimes when you're just kind of, you have a routine and you're doing the same thing over and over again, you just get in a rut. But if you're forced to take time off, your brain and your body kind of do a reset. And when you come back, you can kind of break through to the next level pretty quickly. I mean, when I had my daughter, I took quite a bit of time off. And when I came back, almost immediately, I mean, for the first month, I got tuned up repeatedly because I had been gone for so long. But after that, I made a lot of leaps and bounds really quickly. And I think it's just because when, you kind of give your brain some time away, when it comes back, you are able to break out of those existing thought patterns and look at everything in a new light. So we talked about that before in like the inversion episode and in the episode about overcoming plateaus. Like sometimes you need to break things in order to let them come back and grow back stronger. So there's a whole art to how to break out of your routine and break out of your existing thought processes and look at things from a new light. But yeah, that's one of the blessings in disguise of having an injury, is when you come back, you can kind of reset and start anew. And a lot of the time you'll see some pretty rapid growth right away.
Yeah, I was going to do Nogi Worlds in December, and then I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to take the rest of the year off of competition. I've been competing pretty consistently this year, had some decent results, and I just wanted to enjoy my Christmas time with my family and get a little bit fatter and just let my body heal a little bit and not be preparing for yet another competition, because right now it just feels like I've just been in camp for the last, pretty much the whole year. It's just been another competition after another. So I'm going to take a take a few months off or whatever, and then hit it hard in 2020.
Probably a good idea. Yeah, we got to figure out what we're going to do too for the holiday schedule. We're going to be off for a while, but we want to make sure there are still episodes coming out. So we're probably going to have to record a whole bunch of them and make sure that you guys still have stuff to listen to over the holidays.
Yeah, we got to keep you used bums fed.
Yeah. I don't want to get angry emails from people because we missed an episode. So today, we're going to talk about frugality. This is a topic we've brought up in the past before. This is not a sign that we are pivoting to a financial advice podcast. We're talking about frugality in the concept of strategy for Jiu-Jitsu. So this is a term that Matt has used when discussing especially how to tune up your strategy when you're leaving big holes in your game. Matt, this is something you've talked about in previous episodes where your advice to your students has been you need to be more frugal with what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe you can explain a bit about exactly what you mean when you tell your students adopt a frugal strategy. What exactly does that mean in the context of jiu-jitsu?
Well, this can apply to anyone regardless of skill level or size or strength, but generally it means less movements, more efficient movements, and just the idea that simplifying your game and reducing the amount of energy you exert can make life a lot harder for your training partner. So, for example, like I have two really big guys at my gym, and I'm just using them as an example because they're really good examples of this. One of them is on the cusp of getting his brown belt. The other one's on the cusp of getting his purple belt. And these guys are each like 250, 260, like big guys, dangerous guys.
Or as our American friends would call them, regular size.
Normal.
I don't understand this, guys, because I mean, I see these like message boards and forums where people in the States are saying like I'm like 6'2", 250 pounds, so average size. What are you people talking about? I mean, I thought I was average size, and I'm like 5'8", 160. So
you are not 5'8". Don't.
I'm 5'8".
No, you're not. I'm like 5'7" and a half. You're 5'7".
Well, you and I are the same height, so if you're 5'7" and a half, then so am I. Anyway,
don't go calling yourself 5'8". We can all dream. Anyways, but yeah, so these guys are big guys, and they're both they're both very submission oriented with their games. You can tell that these guys, certain people have different styles, and you can tell when you roll with them in the gym. Some guys will actually simulate in their mind that they're in a competition and they're trying to not give up points and things like that. That's usually how I roll in the gym now, just because I'm constantly thinking about points. But these guys, they go for the kill, right? So it's like they have really good submission strategy. One of them is a really good leg locker. The other one is more of a catch wrestler. So he has sort of an interesting style. I don't know if it's like the best style for mechanics, but he can catch you in some weird stuff, right?
Yeah.
The only problem is both of these guys would go for techniques, and in the process, they'd be giving up their base. They'd be giving up their alignment. They would leave giant holes so that if the move fails, they would be now in the bottom position, or they'd have their guard passed or whatever. And so basically the advice that I gave them is, hey, like when you're on top, like don't even try to submit me for the next few months. I don't even want you to try and like go for a submission. I want you to just try and base out and don't let me sweep you. Mm-hmm. And right away, as soon as they changed their strategy and did that, I realized I had made a grave mistake. I was like, oh, God damn it. Now I have a 260-pound guy who's actually considering his base as opposed to trying to finish me. And a lot of the time when these guys try and finish you, like I said, they'll fall over and they get tunnel vision, right? But if you tell them to actually adopt a style that's a little bit more conservative, a little bit more frugal, and just exert less energy, not only do they not fall over and they can sort of see what's going on in front of them rather than looking for the submission, but they actually are fresher at the end of the round as well, just because they're exerting less energy.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, when we talk about frugality, part of that is energy conservation, but that's not even really the most important part. Like the most important part is not giving your opponent an opening that you can exploit. The way that I think of frugality generally is a frugal strategy is one where you just never give your opponent a lever. Now, like a mistake that a lot of beginners make, especially at the white belt or even at the blue belt level, is they'll basically, like if they're trying to pass your guard, they'll basically just bum rush you. Like they'll just try to go flying past you, and they're so greedy and explosive that they usually wind up leaving an arm or a leg dangling. And if you do that against a black belt like us, I mean, you're going to get swept or you're going to get submitted. So this is advice that I think is good for anyone, especially at a more junior level. It's one of the first things you should really pick up is understanding the importance of not exposing an arm or a leg when you go for an attack. I've got a guy that I spar with who is, I mean, he's nowhere near as big or experienced as your guys, but he had a similar situation where he was a lot bigger than me, but I would always sweep him or submit him immediately when he was in my guard. And he realized pretty soon that it was because if I got a hold of his leg, or if I got a hold of his arm, or if I got an underhook on him, he was cooked, right? So he realized pretty quickly that the best strategy is not to let me do that.
Yeah, structures.
So, exactly. So now that he knows that, you know, if you keep T-Rex arms in and you don't like leave your leg sticking out and you don't let me get the underhook, now it's a nightmare for me to sweep this guy. And he's a lot bigger than me, but he's only a blue belt, and I still have a heck of a time sweeping him just because he's so good at closing up those gaps. So having a frugal strategy is important because, sometimes being hyper aggressive, sometimes that will work, especially if you catch your opponent off guard. But when it goes wrong, it usually goes catastrophically wrong. On the other hand, if you're frugal and you're not greedy about trying to like go for a pass before you get your grips and before you and without protecting your structure and your posture, if you're not greedy about that stuff, then you're more likely going to be able to hold the position and make things happen the way that you want. So we've talked in the past too about how jiu-jitsu is in a lot of ways, it's a game of probabilities, right? And if you're going for like catch submissions, or you're just trying to power through a pass or power through a submission, yeah, you might get it, but the probability is going to be a lot lower than if you were very frugal with your strategy. It's better to be frugal and have like an 80% chance of getting what you want versus being explosive but leaving openings and only having a 40% chance of getting what you want.
Yeah, like for anyone listening, if you've ever sparred with someone on their first day, generally what they try and do is like if you're on the bottom position, they'll try and rush your guard and put all their energy into you, all their force, because they don't really know what to do. They have no control of their center of gravity. They have no idea about alignment, anything like that. So generally they will be rushing your guard, and as a result, it makes it quite easy to reverse them and use their own momentum against them. So that's one of the most common mistakes that I see beginners make. It's one of the, I remember when I was a white belt, I did that, and that was a very big learning lesson for me. I kept getting arm barred by this guy, and I was like, how are you arm barring me? He's like, because you're rushing right in and you're allowing me to just, redirect you. So
only fools rush in.
That's a great movie. But yeah, like, being able to also pull back and give less energy is one of the key fundamentals to, not getting swept, not getting thrown, in grappling in general, and not overexerting yourself. And, you'll notice when you watch high level jiu-jitsu, like black belt divisions, a lot of the time you don't even see a lot of movement. Some matches, you'll get two really high level opponents that just sort of cancel each other out and lock in, and for minutes at a time there's not a lot of action happening, and it's because they're both so high level and there's so much jockeying for control that's going on. Neither of them wants to give the other one too much of a lever sticking out or too much of their momentum or center of gravity. Whereas if you watch like two purple belts or two blue belts go at it, a lot of the time it's way more entertaining. You'll just see like two cats fighting, and guys are willing to go for stuff because they're a little bit less, maybe a little bit less aware and possibly less strategic as well. Like a funny thing, one of my buddies, Clint Cooper, said to me, he's like, man, if I put on, IBJJF Worlds in the black belt division, I'm falling asleep by the 6th minute, but I could watch kids fight all day long in my kids class.
It's funny because, I think everyone can readily observe this at their gym. Like at our gym, I love watching like the purple belts go at it because they're good enough that they can do good jiu-jitsu, but they're also still inexperienced enough that they will just throw caution to the wind. So it's amazing to watch. They'll just be, it reminds me of those old Looney Tunes cartoons where you've got like two two people fighting and you just see like a cloud and every once in a while a hand pops out or something.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like. But if you watch two black belts fight, it can be very boring. Like they can be just sitting in guard for like 10 minutes with nothing visibly happening.
Yeah.
But man, when you're the guy in the match, you realize there's a lot of very, very high level strategy happening.
Yeah, and that's the patience aspect that you only get after 7 to 10 years of competition experience, because then you actually start, like it's happening to me now, is where I'm actually developing a skill where I can play the rules as opposed to just grappling, right? If you just go in there and trying to win a match, you leave a lot of mistakes open, and then if your opponent is more aware, they can capitalize on those mistakes and play the rules. Whereas, if you're very frugal with your game and you're thinking about the points and you're trying not to make these mistakes, the match can be less entertaining to watch. But, at the highest level, sometimes it has to be that way because your opponent's going to be very much the same. It's all about winning, right? So sometimes that's how it goes in these matches.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that, how, patience and frugality go so hand in hand. And it is hard when you really want to win and you really want to get a submission or a sweep. It's hard to understand that you have to be patient, and your gut reaction might be to go for something, but you've got to be smart about it, because if you don't have control when you initiate an attack sequence, you're going to leave something exposed. We've talked in the past heavily about the importance, for example, of the engagement phase and of grips. The grip fighting is really one of the most important phases of jiu-jitsu.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And when you look at black belts, part of the reason why it looks like nothing is happening is because a good black belt is not going to move until they know they've won the grip fight. Like I am not going to try to pass someone who's got dominant grips on me. I'm going to hunker down and I'm going to try to defeat their grips. And only once I know that I have the grip situation under control will I try to pass. Whereas a purple belt might not be so concerned about that. They might just try to power their way through something or just try to explode through it. Mm-hmm. And that can work, but you really leave an opening, because what's going to happen is if your opponent has grips on you and you try to do a pass or do really pretty much anything, by virtue of the fact that they have the dominant grips, that means that they've got one of your levers. So you're doing a big explosive or committed movement while someone has control of one of your arms or your legs or even your neck. And that almost always means something bad is going to happen to you. So when we talk about frugality, a big part of that is understanding that you don't move and you don't go until you've won the grip fight.
Yeah, it's basically we're describing patience and understanding of the grips and the strategy involved, but not rushing in is a great point, Steve. Like rushing in and giving up your base and your center of gravity, and then eating a sweep or getting submitted is not. That's never the goal in jiu-jitsu. The goal is to be efficient and to make as few mistakes as possible. So sometimes, a lot of the time in jiu-jitsu, less is more. And I try and do that more and more now, because I know how frustrating it can be when you're rolling with someone and you're being really frugal and they're looking at you frustrated as hell because they can't out-grip you. They want to progress, but you're not letting them, right? And then learning how to sort of corner people and funnel them into these little traps where you can now set up certain techniques because they're getting impatient is also a good skill for anyone.
Yeah, and against someone who is not particularly experienced or hasn't really consciously defined a strategy, sometimes being frugal is very effective, because like you said, Matt, they will get frustrated and eventually they might get greedy, right? If you continually frustrate someone and you don't give them any openings to attack, at some point they might make the mistake of trying to go for it even though there's really no opening. And that's what you want, because that means that the other person is creating an opening for you. Now, this is maybe not so likely to happen at high levels, but if you're at brown belt or below, it's completely feasible that if you can just deny your opponent any opportunity to attack you, then eventually they're probably going to get frustrated and try to power through something. And that's usually where openings get left.
Yeah. And usually in grappling, and even any combat sport, really, any offensive movement or attack is going to leave some degree of vulnerability, right? So a lot of people will It doesn't matter if you're in top position or bottom position. A lot of people will wait for that moment at the highest level because those openings become so few and far between. True masters of the game will actually, wait for these opportunities where someone employs an attack and then use that to launch a counter attack, right? When I fought Bruno Frazado at the Las Vegas Open in the finals, like the whole first 5 minutes, he was not really doing too much at all, and he was happy to play on top. I could tell he was preparing for ADCC, and he was, he wasn't really doing too much, and I knew that he was going to come out a little bit slower, and then as the match progressed, that's when he was going to start turning it on. And as I went for an arm drag around the 6-minute mark, I think, and then he used that as he based out. He used it to hop over into a really slick knee cut pass, and as soon as he landed chest to chest, I knew I was done because he had the underhook, he had his knee through, and at the end of his foot wasn't exposed. So I was like, God damn it, like I'm caught here. Sure enough, he passed, he mounted me, and then I fought off the mount for like 2 minutes. And then the last few minutes of the match, I was basically just playing catch up. I was down, by a pretty sizable lead at that point. So it was like a really smart strategy to go against someone who's, a veteran of that degree, and who to fall for his trap, essentially, where he was just more patient than me. And then he just capitalized on my attempt. Right.
Yeah,
so it's,
And it can be hard to be patient too when you've got the clock running against you, right? That's a challenging thing to do. And to some extent, you have to balance patience versus time constraints. But in a lot of situations, frugality is probably the governing strategy, especially if things are generally even at that point in time. I guess that's good to understand that even at the high levels, people make those mistakes and leave those kinds of openings. I read a great article, I think on Farnham Street, a really awesome blog about mental models, where they were talking about how, for average people or anyone, for anyone who's basically not like the number one person in the world, sometimes the easiest way to win is like, it's not to try to be brilliant. It's just to try to avoid making any mistakes. Because a lot of the time, that's all that success means, is just you minimize making mistakes for a long period of time. So that's really one of the reasons why frugality is so important, because against a good opponent, if you make a mistake, they will capitalize on it without hesitation. This is something that at the junior levels, often you don't notice because people are making mistakes left and right. And, a lot of the time, if you're sparring at a blue belt level, if you make a mistake, your opponent might miss that window, and then you can just keep going. And you may not realize how many mistakes you're making. But I can tell you, when I spar with a black belt, if I make any kind of mistake whatsoever, then they're immediately on it, right? Like you have a split second to capitalize, and a good black belt will capitalize during that split second if you make a mistake. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's good, actually, to maximize your training with experienced people, because they will not allow you to make mistakes and kind of wave them away. You will become acutely aware if you make a mistake, because you'll pay for it right away.
Yeah, and you have to have the lower ranked roles as well. If you're a gym owner, like when I roll with, I'd say probably like 40%, 30% of my rolls are with white belts. And I have my own reasons for that. It's not because I enjoy beating up white belts, but it's because as a gym owner, someone new comes in the door, I don't want them to think that I'm not going to roll with them because they're a white belt. So I want to make sure that I get a feel for everyone in the gym, regardless of level, and I also show that value that they're paying me the money. I'm gonna also give them my time to roll as well. I'm not just gonna be hunting the high level rolls, but you do have to have like a variety of different levels to train with. You need to have the beginners where you can kind of do what you want and you can experiment, and then you also need to have the higher level guys that really don't let shit slide. It's harder to make stuff work on them. Just like how I think you need to have the small, agile, quick guys, and you also need to have the big bruisers to roll with. That contrast, I think, kind of gives you that full spectrum of training partners.
It's the whole plus minus equals thing, right? You want to have people that you train with who are better than you, people who are inferior than you, and people who are on your level, because you're going to get different lessons and different value out of training with all of them. Like, I actually really enjoy training with white belts, especially because it forces me to really analyze what they're doing. First of all, because if I can help them get better and I can give them advice on how to defeat me, then that makes me better. I can actually get a really good, valuable roll out of a white belt a lot of the time, because if they've been rolling with me for a while and I just tell them what I'm doing and how to shut it down, if they can attune themselves to my game specifically, then yeah, even if they're not a well-rounded grappler, if they know how to deal with my game, it forces me to vary things up and to shake things up. So there's value in raising the level in the room, right? There's value in helping those guys get better. But also the other thing with rolling with white belts and lower level belts is it forces you to really understand what you're doing, because you have to train and encourage them. So it gives you the opportunity to look for mistakes in their game and help correct them. I mean, the problem with training with guys who are really good is you're very much in the moment. You're just trying to survive, or you're trying to win. Whereas if you're training with a white belt, you can slow things down and analyze and help them. And that forces you to really think things through consciously in a way that you often don't do when you're grappling competitively. So I find it very valuable actually to train with lower level belts. I mean, obviously being one of the senior guys in my gym, most of my roles are with lower level guys. And I find that to be extremely valuable across the board for me, and hopefully for them as well.
Isn't it funny when you roll with like a beginner or just a lower ranked like white belt, when they do stupid shit? It's like it can throw you off, because sometimes you expect like a reaction from someone who is maybe more aware or has the proper responses, like the predictable responses that you have basically aren't there. Yeah. So you do something to someone new, and there's a whole different type of predictable responses. A lot of them are based around
unpredictable response.
Yeah, unpredictable response, like survival. You know, like for example, if you're behind a white belt, you got to be worrying about them flailing their elbows and hitting you in the head and stuff like that. So like it adds a whole different degree of predictable responses where, you know, this guy doesn't really know what he's doing. It's an interesting contrast rolling with someone. I find quite often when I'm rolling with a higher level guy, the roll goes much smoother than if I roll with like a white belt. Like, so there are really good white belts. There's white belts that are mature above their, their skill level, and they move, you can tell that they're thinking. And then there's other white belts who are just shit shows and they're just spazzing and trying so hard. And it's like, I find those rolls are often, not only are they not as pleasant, but they're not as smooth as like if I roll with some of my senior purples and above. Right?
Yeah, 100%. These are people who have not yet learned frugality, right? And the importance of kind of biding your time and picking your spots. There is something to be said about predictable responses, because the predictable responses that you're going to get out of a trained opponent are often very different from the ones that you're going to get from an untrained opponent. An untrained opponent is probably not going to be frugal, and they're not going to have solid technique. They're just going to flail and go for it.
Use attributes.
Yeah. And so the problem is, if you are really used to training only with very technical, experienced people, you might find yourself underperforming when you train with the whitest of the white belts. And I've had this happen to me, and I learned from that lesson that I need to make sure I'm still training with the brand new guys, because I've been in situations where, I pick a new guy to train with and I'm trying to do technical jiu-jitsu, and this guy's never even heard of technical jiu-jitsu, and he might actually even kick my ass because it's been so long since I've actually trained with someone who doesn't do the right thing that the predictable responses I'm expecting are not there. So it is important, especially if you're interested in any aspect of self-defense, it is important to train with brand new people, because they have a completely different set of predictable responses. Like, their predictable responses are going to come from biological programming. Whereas like when you and me train,
like fight or flight.
Yeah. Whereas when you or me train, our responses are going to come from years of drilling and technical training, where we've programmed ourselves to respond using jiu-jitsu. Whereas an untrained person is going to basically just do whatever their body tells them in that situation. So
that's how you get hurt, too.
Yeah. So
both of you.
Well, exactly. Right. There's a very high risk of injury. And if you're not used to that kind of intensity, basically someone who has no concept of frugality, if you're not used to that, then it can really put you on the spot. And even a very experienced grappler can get flustered by that and can underperform in that situation. So interestingly, the way that I shut this down, a common mistake that people make when they're sparring with someone who is being overly aggressive and not frugal, a common mistake is that you yourself, if you get flustered, you go into fight or flight, and then you try to match their intensity. That's a really bad idea, because someone's going to get injured, and you're also lowering yourself to their skill level, right? Like if I'm sparring with some white belt and they try to just smash me with no technique. And my response is just be like, okay, fine. Well, if you're going to do that, I'm going to do that. And then I start trying to muscle them. Now I'm playing using my worst possible game. I should be using technique and I'm not being frugal. And I'm basically lowering myself to their skill level. And now the risk of injury is going to go up dramatically for both of us. So interestingly, I find when your opponent is not being frugal and they're overly aggressive, the best thing for you to do is to be super frugal. Basically like shore up your defense and let the other guy basically make a mistake, because he will.
Yeah.
Like let him burn out his energy and let him leave an arm or a leg dangling and then exploit that. That's a common mistake that happens, especially against a bigger or more aggressive person. So frugality is the answer in a situation like that, if you ask me.
Yeah, it's pretty funny how like I see a lot of new people coming through the gym all the time, and some of them just have like this maturity about them. They understand, okay, I need to conserve energy, I need to think about my movement, and they'll do really well right off the bat. And then other guys will come in and it'll just be crazy, like spazzing, freaking out, like crazy spazzy movements. It's funny how some people have that awareness and other people just lack it completely. It could be a background thing. Like it could be someone maybe as a wrestler, they feel like, well, wrestling is kind of an explosive grappling art, right? So I'm going to use what I know, which is how to be explosive. Whereas someone who comes in without any grappling experience at all is almost trying to like match the pace a little bit, so they don't think that they have to be as explosive. But there's definitely a wide variety of junior people to train with. And like you said, Steve, you can't always be matching intensity for intensity. Now, that being said, sometimes I do, like, usually what'll happen is if I'm rolling with someone new, and this has happened recently, I always try and kill them with kindness, right? Like you said, like start off going slow. You know, if they start turning it up, see if you can just exploit them a little bit and look for an opening. And quite often there is an opening, because they're not frugal, right? They'll just come right at you. But I remember like a few weeks ago, a guy came in and he was rolling really hard with everyone. Not a big guy, smaller than me, and rolled with me really hard, and not good technique. And then after a few rounds, I just told the class, I didn't single him out, but I said, hey, just so you guys know, if you're new and you go really hard, you know, your partner's going to match your intensity. So just in jiu-jitsu, just know that like the harder you go, better chance that your opponent is going to try and turn it up again. So that was like my fair warning, right? And then I watch him again. He rolls with one of my junior guys, and he's grinding his head into him. He's like driving his elbows into his legs and all this stuff. I'm like, okay, I've been nice. I've shown you.
Now it's time to smash the white belt.
Now it's time for you to learn, right? So then I roll with him again. He comes at me, instant sweep into mount, and then I just drove my belly into his face for like 2 minutes and just totally immobilized him, shut him down, and just didn't submit him, but just held him down. It was just like, hey, like this is now what's going to happen. You have to be put down now. Like I tried to tell you, I tried to show you, and now, you know, I'm not going to match an intensity if I don't have to.
You're actually de-escalating in that situation.
I de-escalated. I immobilized him using wedges, right? I used wedges to immobilize his body, and eventually I just isolated his arm, and I just had it so separated from his body, I just held it there, and he knew that arm was gone if I wanted it, right?
Yeah.
Then I just went to his back, held him in his back, and then right as the time was running out, I finished him with a choke, just to like put home that, like, you know, explosiveness and athleticism is not, you know, as valuable as it can be when skill is the same and technique is the same. It's not the driving force behind your game. It shouldn't be, anyways, in my opinion, especially if you're like, you know, smaller than a guy like me.
Yeah. I mean, that I find is sometimes the only way that people are going to learn is to see it and experience it in action and understand like what happens when a much higher level person decides to use jiu-jitsu to basically just completely de-escalate you and prevent you from being able to move or really do much of anything. It's one thing to say this is how jiu-jitsu is supposed to work, but I think sometimes it's very hard to go against your body's natural programming. A lot of the time these people are not being like dicks. It's just, this is what their body has in it programmed them to do when they're in a scary fight or flight situation, and they don't have the experience yet to be in control of that response. So sometimes with some people, unfortunately, just telling them the words is not good enough. You have to actually show them directly, and it just needs to be drilled into them repeatedly over and over again. But yeah, to your point, I mean, there are some people who just, they walk onto the mats and they're just like, they just kind of naturally have the right movements. I mean, I remember when you and I started, you always kind of felt like you had sort of the right movements. I think it's just a natural way of being in tune with your body. I don't know if maybe it's comes from people who just have more athletic experience, because presumably, even if you come from a completely unrelated sport, to some level, if you train anything, you're going to develop an awareness of how your body works and what kind of movements are efficient and what kind of movements are not. Because I definitely can relate. There are some people that I train with, and even at a very junior level, it feels like they're in control.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, they might not beat me, but they might dramatically overperform what I expected of them. And I can think of some people I train with who kind of fall under that bucket, where even at a white belt or a blue belt level, it just feels like they're moving in all of the right ways.
That's right. And as the instructor, if I'm rolling with someone who's like brand new, it doesn't impress me if you can like muscle through things, or if you can, force you can force a sweep, or you scramble so much that you get the better of me. That doesn't impress me at all. What impresses me much. That don't impress me much.
What needs to impress you? You don't, know that they've got the moves, but you need to know, do they have the touch?
Do they have the touch? It's like you said, the proper reaction and the proper movement is what impresses me, right?
Yeah.
And usually after I roll with a beginner, as the coach, I will always give some form of feedback, whether it's like, you need to do less, man, you need to stop moving so much, or hey, you know what, you did this, you always thought about managing the distance, as soon as I swept you fought to get right back to a guard. That's really good. Like, it's really important to give that immediate feedback. We talked about the feedback loop, right? And how that can really help reinforce the proper corrections from the beginning as an instructor. So I think it's pretty important to make sure as the owner of the gym that you're rolling with everyone and that you're giving that immediate feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when it comes to training out your natural biological impulses. Immediate feedback is a very, very good way to do it. As a senior guy, it's one of the most helpful things that you can do with your more junior students, rather than getting obsessive about like, did they miss step 11 of this 12-step armbar? Sometimes it can be better. Sometimes it can be better to just point out and be like, you're breathing too hard, or your muscles are too tense right now, or you're not being frugal enough. Because for most people, rather than focusing on very specific techniques, just drilling in those good body mechanics is going to be a lot more valuable than worrying about specific moves or techniques.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah. In terms of frugality, like maybe we can give some very specific examples, because I hope at this point we've convinced people that this is important. But let's talk about, I guess a good example is like, I'm trying to pass someone's guard. Maybe, I don't know, open guard, close guard, whatever. If I'm trying to pass someone's guard, like, what does frugality look like in that situation? What would a good frugal guard passer look like versus someone who is not being frugal?
Well, I mean, I think it kind of depends on the position, but let's say you don't have a close guard. So let's say your legs aren't wrapped around my body and closing so that I can't escape. Okay. So I'm like in an open guard. Well, first of all, to be frugal, I need to make sure that you don't have any strong grips on me. So if you have a collar grip, I'm not going to try and like rush your guard. Could I pass your guard if you have a collar grip? I could in theory, but there's also a really good chance that if you're a good guard player, you're going to elevate me, you're going to move me around, and that collar grip's going to be tough. So I need to make sure I break all grips. And I also need to make sure, like, if I'm in a combat base in your guard and I'm taking a lower stance, that I keep my knee up in the middle. I connect my knee to my elbow so that there's no chance that you're going to suck me into a closed guard. There's no chance you can isolate my arm as a lever and possibly attack me from there. Just basically keeping good alignment, I think is that's what frugality would look like when I'm on top in the guard. And then usually, I roll with some guys that are really old school, like a Bibiano Fernandez and Rafael Laporta. These guys are, I think they're both 4th degree black belts, and they're both pretty, like, Bibi's smaller than me and feels like he's he must weigh like 190 pounds. He's so freaking strong and fast. And then Hafa is pretty much exactly my size. Different styles. Hafael is a lot slower and a lot more frugal, but as soon as he gets the grips that he wants, he starts immediately using pressure. Bibiano's another guy who actually isn't super frugal, but his timing is so good that he will immediately go to pass. So one thing I've realized that when I train with Bibiano is when I'm standing with him, he's very frugal. He doesn't go in for a lot of takedowns until he gets grips and whatnot, but he waits for me to pull guard on him. As soon as I pull, he's immediately passing. So it's like really,
I hate when people do that.
It's really tough. So like, because I usually play the collar and sleeve or the collar and ankle, right? So if I get my collar grip and I pull on him, he immediately will try and grab my legs and pass. So I realized last time I rolled with him, if I get a 2-on-1 on the sleeve and I pull, it's harder for him to pass because he can't grip anything because I have one of his arms completely caught, right? So it's like I'm trying to find ways that I can shut down his dynamic passing strategy. But if I get into if let's say I lock up a guard and I get defensive, he immediately stops trying to pass and he gets really low and waits. Then he usually will look for a double underpass. That's kind of the pass he always gets me with in the gi anyways.
Got it.
And yeah, he's very much like pressure based pass once he gets into that position.
You know, it's interesting because what you're describing is even though you're talking about someone who has very much a speed based and dynamic game, what you're describing does still sound like a frugality strategy, because he knows that when you go to pull guard, that's going to leave openings. Pulling guard always leaves some degree of opening. So he's waiting for that. He's not trying to force the situation. He's not trying to do a takedown or pull guard himself. He's waiting for you to make the big movement that's going to leave an opening, and then his whole game funnels into exploiting that. So that even if his game is very speed-based and dynamic, that's still a frugality strategy. I mean, I do something very similar too, where when I'm standing up with people, I mean, I really have no interest in trying to throw or take someone down. So, but I will stand up with people.
All that barbaric stuff.
All of that barbaric judo and wrestling.
Ugh,
yeah.
Takedowns.
But I will play stand-up mostly with the intent of frustrating my opponent and getting them to burn energy. So I'll make them grip fight me for a while, knowing that I can block, in the gi anyway, I can block almost any shot or throw just by being a nuisance. And then eventually, once they start to get tired, then I'll start to funnel it into my game. So I do it just to kind of create a point of frustration.
Yeah, I just competed in the Revolution last weekend in Tacoma, and I actually got silver. I lost in the finals by referee's decision, which is really frustrating. And I was actually being too frugal in that match, and it's funny how it can work in that way too. You know, like here's an example. Like throughout brown belt, I played a lot with barambolos and crab rides, and like I was trying to force myself upside down in a lot of my matches. I was trying to force it, and I was trying to force leg locks as well, because they were kind of the flavors that I was playing with.
They are spicy,
and they are spicy. And I tried to make those things happen in the matches. I wanted to see how successful I could be. You know, if you follow guys like Mendez brothers, they're baramboloing everyone in their matches. It's like, okay, I want to be like that. I want to move like that. So the best way to do it is try in competition. And it worked sometimes. A lot of the time, it would fail because I'd be forcing something that wasn't there.
Yeah.
And then again, someone who's got really good base and understands how to shut it down.
You're making openings then, right?
You're making openings, and a lot of the time I would end up getting stacked for like 5 minutes, and it's just like a shitty way to lose a match, right? So once I got my black belt, I put out my DVD or whatever on inversions, and then I started actually moving my game backwards from fancy stuff into a more traditional style, like pass the guard, get to mount, just work basic things from there, hunt the back instead of inverting. But this was actually a match where I think that I could have done more, and I probably should have gone upside down a little bit because I don't think my opponent would have expected it. I didn't really see any barambolos at all when I was down there, and I feel like if I had gone for some barambolos, it might have opened up. So it's funny how, like, you do want to be frugal, especially in competition. You don't want to do anything that you haven't really practiced, and you don't want to do anything that could leave you with a lot of risk. But at the same time, if you're too frugal, that's also not good, because then you get a situation where you get a referee's decision, you leave it in the hands of the referee, and they're going to pick someone, right? And 50% chance it's you. Like, I thought I did enough to win the match, but the referee thought something else. So, I could have gone for more, I think. And I think that, mixing in, rather than just funneling to Berimbolo, trying to mix something in that was maybe a little bit, unorthodox from the standard traditional jiu-jitsu probably would have been a nice mix. But, hindsight's 2020 now, right?
Yeah. This is an important takeaway that frugality doesn't mean don't do anything. When you're talking about finance, I've heard people say that like there's a difference between being cheap and being frugal. People who are cheap just worry and they don't spend money on anything regardless, and they're so focused on not spending anything. Frugal people will spend money, but they'll do it smartly, and they're not going to waste. They're going to be efficient. And I think that's an important distinction to make in jiu-jitsu as well, because frugality does not mean you sit there and you do nothing. I mean, you're still trying to win. And this is especially important in a competition standpoint, because if you're in a position where you are the one who is expected to be the aggressor, like if you're the one who's on top in guard, you might get penalized if you're not doing anything. So you are still trying to attack. You are still trying to win, but the difference is you're not stupid about your placement. You're not stupid about like, I'm so eager that I'm going to try and go before I've got my grips, or I'm going to go before I've secured the positioning of my arms and my legs. Frugality doesn't mean you just sit there like a rock. It just means that you make sure that you've taken care of your own defense before you go on offense. To me, that's really what it means. So frugality is not intended to be an endorsement of being like lazy or passive. You still want to be aggressive. It's just a matter of making sure that while being aggressive, you are keeping your own body safe. This is also important for injury prevention. I mean, a frugal style is not just good for a strategy, it's also good for energy conservation, and it's good for injury prevention. Yeah. If you keep your arms, your legs, and your neck secured, and you're not like throwing yourself into a position while leaving one of your limbs or your neck dangling, you're less likely to get injured, because there's just less damage that can go wrong if your opponent doesn't have you all tangled up somehow, right? So I found for me, this has been a very helpful strategy for reducing injury, is just to be very frugal and make sure that my opponent does not get a strong grip on me one way or the other.
Yeah, and as you and I get older, Steve, we know that all these things make sense in terms of not only just losing athletic ability and slowing down, but like you say, like preventing injury and things like that. Like, you don't want to think about going in like being a 50-year-old grappler and still using the same athleticism and attributes that you had when you were 25, right? It changes. So definitely a frugal mindset is, like you said, it prevents injuries. And, as we get older and later on into our grappling journeys, it's definitely something that I think is important to stay safe and stay on the mats.
The other thing too is that I think the reason why some people don't adopt frugal strategies until later is because it's easy to give yourself a lot of false positives if you're being like spazzy and aggressive. As an example, I mean, when you are like, I don't know, let's say you're purple belt or brown belt or blue belt or whatever, probably the way that you're measuring your own performance during training is like, how many submissions did I get today? Did I get submitted? Did someone submit me? And the problem with that kind of mindset is, you might have submitted like 2 people, but maybe in every other role you had, you went for a submission and you failed, and then you wound up just like getting pinned on the bottom. Yeah. I mean, is that really a good thing, right? If your submission rate is like 20 or 40%, but then every other time you're getting just like smashed on the bottom. I mean, the brain kind of tunes out those experiences if you're looking to measure how many submissions you got. This is another reason why counting submissions in the gym is not effective. Like when I was more junior, that's kind of how I gauged my own performance is, am I getting submissions or am I getting submitted? And that's kind of how I decided whether it was a good or a bad day on the mats. But now, I don't care so much if I get, like a lot of days, I don't get any submissions at all. What I care about now is predictability. I want to know, when I trained today, how many matches was I able to control the position? And as long as I felt like I was the one in control and I could secure top position or keep my opponent at bay, I'm happy. And I will not attack a submission if there's a percentage chance that it's going to go sideways and I'm going to wind up on the bottom and get into a bad spot. Like, I would rather maintain control and maintain good predictability in terms of where the match is going to go than attempt a submission and maybe suffer catastrophic losses if I fail and it goes wrong. So this is another reason why frugality is important, is because like, especially at a junior level, submissions kind of give you this high of, oh, I did a great job on the mat. But like, if you had 10 rolls and you got subs in 2 of them, and then you wound up getting pinned and bottom side control on the other 8, was that really a good day? Yeah. Like, at the end of the day, your focus should be, I was safe and secure in every single match I had.
Yeah. Yeah, so. I agree. And I think a lot of people those goals aren't necessarily clear, and it might just be where they train or the philosophy of their coach. It might be that they are competitors specifically in submission only competition, so they don't care if they get past, usually sub only is like a no-gi situation, not always, but a lot of the time. So they feel like, well, if I get my guard passed, it's just a matter of time until I get my guard back, like I can slip out of it. But if you're in the gi and you get your guard passed, I find it a lot more difficult to escape sometimes, just because of the friction and the grips and things like this. So sometimes you'll have certain goggles on that will give you those false positives where you're like, well, who cares if I get my guard passed? I train for sub only. I don't, as long as I can get to like overtime, I'm good. It's like, well, that's not really, that's why the points are there, because the points dictate positions that are dangerous, right? So it's like, I don't know. My philosophy has changed over the years. I used to love submission only grappling, and now the older I get, the more that I really value positional play and points and all those things. I think you need to have an awareness and an appreciation for all the rule sets, and to be able to not only not get submitted, but to be able to dictate the position. But to just be like, oh, well, I got a bunch of submissions today, but I also got passed a bunch. It's like, well, that's a false positive. That's not really like, because if that wrong person passes your guard, you can't always rely that you're going to get out, right? So the better strategy will be, how can I make my guard unpassable?
How can I create predictable results in my matches? Like, how can I make sure that, rather than like, how do I end this with the submission? How can I make sure that 80 or 90% of the time things go the way that I expect them to go? Predictability is so important when it comes to high performance in a martial art. Like, if you're one of these people who has just incredible submissions, but if you don't get to that position, then you get screwed. Like, that's not really a good or a complete game. I mean, I kind of think of some of these like specialists, like, for example, do you remember that guy in the UFC, Cody McKenzie? From the guy who's like
guillotine guy from
he had an amazing guillotine, but like if he didn't get that guillotine, he was kind of screwed. And there were a few amazing matches he had where he got these just brutal looking guillotines on people. And that's a great skill to have in your back pocket. But it felt very much with him like the match was a coin flip, because if he didn't get his guillotine, he was in big trouble. So you've got to have a more complete game. And it's great if you have like one deadly submission like that, but you've got to, or in his case, the deadliest catch, because he was Alaskan.
And a fisherman.
But you've got to have a way to have a predictable outcome to your match and get the funnel back to where you want it to go.
And at that level, I mean, it's recorded. People are going to be studying your matches. Like, if you see that this guy just keeps guillotining everyone and you have to fight him, you're definitely going to funnel the match away from, for example, shooting in on like a double and giving him your head, right? You just won't do that, because that you're just putting yourself in the most vulnerable position you can do. So you'll stay away from that position. Cody McKenzie, that's his name, right? Cody McKenzie. Let's remember his best match against Philippe Matos in the gi, when he got wrist locked in like 3 seconds. Do you remember that?
Was that Philippe?
Yeah.
Is that who Philippe was fighting? Because I saw that match and I remember it. Philippe, for those who don't know, Philippe Matos is a very well-known local guy, really awesome guy from the Vancouver area.
Head instructor of Roll Academy in beautiful North Vancouver. He was fighting Cody McKenzie in the gi. Cody gripped his collar, and then Philippe did an instant wrist lock on him. And then Cody, after Philippe got his hand raised, Cody's like, "Want to do it again? I don't know that stuff." Want to do it again? I didn't get to guillotine you, so yeah, cool. That's funny.
Awesome. Well, I think this was a really valuable talk. Matt, is there anything else you wanted to add about frugality before we wrap it up?
Not really. I mean, I think we covered it all. And just in life too, like sometimes when you're thinking about like what obstacles you want to go through in life, like for example, for a while there, my obstacle was, how do I get out of my job and make cooking my full-time job? Or sorry, make jiu-jitsu my full-time job. And you got to assess obstacles in your path that might slow you down from reaching your goal. And a lot, maybe it's that new car, maybe it's you want to go out and go partying every weekend. And a lot of them are financial things in the real world. Let's be honest, right? Certain things can hold you back. So being frugal in your life, not going out and partying and spending $200 on a bar tab, or not buying that new car, or, not eating out 5 days a week. These things add up, and eventually you can reach certain goals a lot quicker. So I think frugality frugality is a really important thing to think about in life too. Not necessarily being cheap, although you could kind of look at it as being cheap, but just being smart with your money. And, you'll be amazed at how much money you'll save, even if you don't buy coffee all the time. Like, this is something that I'm guilty of, is usually I'll buy a coffee probably 5 times a week, right? And
it adds up, right?
It adds up a lot.
You go to Starbucks and you drop $5 a day on coffee or $10 a day on coffee, and that winds up being hundreds of dollars every month. And it's kind of like a silent cost, because it's not one big expense. It's a series of very, very small ones. But when it adds up at the end of the month, you realize like these little pebbles have grown into a pretty big pile. Frugality and cheapness, like we said, are kind of different things. I mean, cheapness is kind of an example of like a scarcity mindset, where you're so afraid of doing anything that you're just not spending any money at all. And that's not great. Frugality is better, because that's where you're being intentional about how you spend money. You're being smart about it. You're not afraid to do it where it makes sense. But the one thing to bear in mind is that it is a lot easier to like avoid a big problem than to get into that big problem and then try to dig your way back out. I mean, debt is a perfect example of this. It's relatively easy to avoid going into debt. It's very hard to get out of debt. So, and this is a good example of strategy, not just in life, but in jiu-jitsu as well. It's the same thing in jiu-jitsu, and that's why you want to avoid getting caught in these bad positions. It's very hard to dig yourself out of a hole. It's a lot easier to just not get into the hole in the first place. Cool. So in terms of mental models that we talked about today, we talked about grips dictating position. This is really, first and foremost, probably the most important thing as it pertains to frugality. I mean, if you just set to yourself the goal that you're not going to advance your attack until you've won the grip fight, you probably already have a pretty good frugal style, and that's going to keep you safe in most situations. We talked about plus minus equals. This is a mental model that was pioneered by Frank Shamrock, actually, and is what he basically talks about is that you need to train with people who are better, lesser, and equal to you in terms of skill, because you're going to get different benefits from training with each group. We talked about raising the level in the room. When you're dealing with more junior people, if you can attune them to how to defeat your game specifically, not only is it going to make them more effective, but it's going to make you more effective, and you can wind up getting pretty quality rolls out of junior people, even if you're a lot more experienced than they are. We talked about predictable responses. I mean, a lot of frugality is understanding that predictable responses vary depending on level of experience. And the predictable responses that you're going to get out of a very junior person are quite different from the ones you're going to get out of a more senior person. Usually the new white belts, their predictable responses will not be frugal at all. They're just going to bum rush you. And that's a style that if you're not ready and equipped to deal with that, then even if you're very experienced, it can throw you off. We talked about the feedback loop. One of the best ways to encourage frugality in your students is to tell them right away when they're not being frugal so that they can fix the problem on the spot. Good feedback is timely and actionable. So you want to tell people right away when you've got that feedback for them, and you want to make sure that they know what they have to do to fix the problem. And last, we talked about the scarcity mindset as opposed to an abundance mindset. Frugality does not mean being like cheap. It doesn't mean do nothing. That's a scarcity mindset. It just means be intentional and intelligent and efficient with where you do expend your energy, or in the rest of your life where you expend your money as well, right?
Yeah, meaning like don't think like, oh, I never want to take my family on vacation, or I never want to go out for a nice meal or something like that. That would be a scarcity mindset. You still got to enjoy the finer things in life, but sometimes accomplishing your goals, whatever they may be, involves, cutting back expenses in certain areas and being just a little bit more smarter with your money. So.
Exactly. Cool. Well, I think that was a great chat. Matt, I got a pretty basic question. I think we've already talked about it before, but maybe good to rehash. So we were asked, I missed the episode about manners, etc. when on the mat, but question, when you have a small cold, do you still train? I missed class Friday as I had a small cough and I did not want to make others sick. Well, my friend, you are a good person and a good training partner.
Not everyone does that.
Yeah, my advice here is just don't train when you have anything communicable, whether it be a cold, flu, skin infection. It's just, there's a lot of reasons why it's bad. I mean, first of all, from your own benefits and your own health, if you train when you're sick, you kind of risk re-aggravating the situation and making it even worse. Like if it's a skin condition or even a cough or something. Like
if it's a skin condition, don't train.
Yeah, don't do that thing where you like tape it over and think it's going to be fine. Like if you have a skin condition, just don't train until it's resolved. Yeah. With a cough, I would also say don't train until you're confident that it's basically gone, or it's actually not even basically gone. I would say wait till it's gone.
I mean, like, you know, if you have like a cold and you wait like 3 to 4 days, it's probably not contagious, even though every case is different. I'm the owner of the gym, so it's like it's a little bit harder for me to miss like a week. You know, like I have to be there. Doesn't mean that I'm going to grapple every time. It just means that it's harder for me to, like, you know, I can get people to cover classes, but usually I only do that when I'm really sick. If I feel like I'm still contagious in any way, I'll most likely not roll at all because I don't want contact with people. But sometimes it's just not possible, since I'm like the main instructor at the gym, for me to just be like, hey guys, I'm not coming in for the next week. It's just not possible. Now, if you are
in that situation, you can still avoid like getting your germs all over these people.
For sure. Yeah. Like I said, I'm not going to spar on those days. And, a lot of the time, if I can get someone to cover, I will.
Yeah. So I would say that if it were me, I generally prefer that you only come back when you're confident that you don't have whatever it was that you had anymore. So I would wait until the cough or the cold are gone. I mean, from a personal standpoint, like I said, it might re-aggravate your condition and make it worse. But also you have to be mindful of the people that you're training with, right? It's kind of a bad thing to do to your friends and your training partners to expose them to something communicable, especially because like within the jiu-jitsu community, there are a lot of people who have careers that require them to engage with those who have compromised immune systems. So like if you're training with someone who is like a medical professional, you really don't want to get them in a situation where they could be sick and still have to go to work. So my preference is always wait it out. I think that's generally the best thing to do. There's always things that you can do to keep sharp even without training. You know, we talked about this before at the beginning of the episode, how sometimes time off can actually force a mental reset. And when you come back, you might be even better than you were when you left. If you need to take time off, I mean, just take a week. There's a lot of YouTube videos out there, a lot of things that you can study or drill on your own.
There's
without having to come to
infinite
the
material
mats.
out there.
Yeah.
Infinite material. Like you'll never watch it all.
Yep. Believe it or not, this podcast is not the only jiu-jitsu content out there. I have been told there's a lot of YouTube videos.
But it is the finest jiu-jitsu podcast.
It is the best. I mean, I'm not saying that any of the other stuff is better than BJJ Mental Models. But that said, sometimes you need a point of comparison. So if you want to really understand how much better this podcast is than everything else, well, you've got to watch that other garbage content. And then you'll be like, wow, Steve and Matt really are on top of things.
Yeah. Talking about you, Matt Byrne podcast.
Our greatest enemy.
Yeah. I actually love the podcast. It's just those guys just shoot the shit basically, and I feel like they're not really trying to teach you anything, but it's still an interesting listen because I love both their personalities, and obviously they're like world-class competitors.
Well, that's the thing. It's like they're not really trying to put together like learnable course material like we're doing, but they're two very, very well-known high-level grapplers, so it's interesting to kind of get into their heads and see how they think and what their life is like.
Yeah. Much love to Keenan and Josh. We should do a joint episode sometimes.
Yeah. If you guys are listening, give us a shout.
Yeah. They're not going to call us.
We could call them.
Yeah. We could just keep
badgering them on social media.
Yeah.
Eventually someone will message them and be like, have you heard of these idiots on BJJ Mental Models who are always
talking
about
shit about you? They've never accomplished anything.
I would love it if like Keenan and Hinger dojo stormed Ascension and just like kicked my ass in front of everybody.
Oh, God.
Open invitation. Okay, so let's do the plugs. As always, we greatly appreciate the support that we get from you guys. If you want to support the show, go to bjjmentalmodels.com/store. We've got patches and we've got shirts for you to buy. We really appreciate all the help that you get. It really helps support the show and keep the stuff going. If you want to learn more, you can go to bjjmentalmodels.com/join. That's our mailing list. We share a lot of information there that we don't share elsewhere. So please do sign up there. We love getting in contact with you. You can also go to bjjmentalmodels.com, which is where we have an online database of the mental models that we've talked about here. Great supplementary research if you want to learn more. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can grab us on Facebook. You can grab us on Instagram. We're always active there. We love hearing from you guys. We love getting feedback, and we love when you have questions for us. So please don't be a stranger.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.